I stood in the back of the church watching my ex-husband walk down the aisle with his new bride, the woman he'd been cheating on me with for 3 years. The woman he'd told me was just a colleague. The woman who was now wearing the white dress and holding the bouquet while smiling like she'd won the lottery. Marcus looked so happy, so proud, so sure that he'd upgraded to a better life. I should have been devastated. I should have been crying in my car outside. But instead, I was calm, because I knew something nobody else in that church knew. And when the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because the woman sitting in the third row, the elegant older woman in the navy suit who nobody seemed to recognize, was about to stand up and say something that would turn my ex-husband's face completely white and stop that wedding dead in its tracks. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we dive into what happened at that wedding, and trust me, what happened was absolutely devastating, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Your support helps me bring you more incredible stories like this one. Now, let's go back to where it all started, because to understand the sweet justice of that wedding day, you need to know the whole story. Donovan, and 4 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 34 years old, a senior architect at a prestigious firm in Chicago, making excellent money and living in a beautiful brownstone in Lincoln Park that I'd renovated myself. But more importantly, I had Marcus. Marcus Donovan, my husband of 8 years. The man I'd met at a charity gala when I was 20. He was a financial consultant, charming and successful, with perfect hair and an even more perfect smile. He knew how to work a room, how to make everyone feel like they were the most important person there, and for a while, he made me feel that way too. We'd had a whirlwind romance, 6 months of dating, a proposal on a beach in Santorini, a wedding that was featured in a local magazine because everything about it was so perfectly coordinated and beautiful. Marissa, my best friend since college, had been my maid of honor. She'd helped me pick the dress, plan the flowers, organize every detail. She'd stood next to me at the altar and smiled while I married Marcus, and I'd felt so lucky to have such an amazing friend. If only I'd known then what I know now. If only I'd paid attention to the way Marcus looked at her when he thought nobody was watching. If only I'd trusted my instincts instead of pushing away those uncomfortable feelings as paranoia. The first year of marriage was good. We bought the brownstone together, spent weekends at farmers markets and dinner parties with friends. Marcus was attentive, bringing me coffee in bed, leaving little notes around the house, planning romantic surprises. I was working long hours at the architecture firm, trying to make partner, pouring myself into designing sustainable buildings and green spaces for the city. I loved my work, loved the feeling of creating something permanent, something that would outlast me. Marcus said he was proud of me, that he loved how passionate I was about my career. He'd kiss me goodbye in the mornings and tell me to knock him dead, and I'd leave feeling supported and loved. But somewhere around year 2, things started to shift. Marcus began working later, taking more business trips, being less available. When he was home, he was on his phone constantly, texting and emailing. He said it was work, that he was trying to build his client base, that the financial consulting business was competitive. I believed him because I wanted to, because I was busy too, working 60-hour weeks trying to land a major commercial project that would secure my partnership. We were two ambitious people building careers, I told myself. This was normal. This was what successful couples dealt with. Marissa was around a lot during this time. She'd gone through a bad breakup and was leaning on me for support. She'd come over for wine and conversation, sometimes staying for dinner when Marcus was traveling. I was happy to have her there. She made me laugh, reminded me of who I was outside of work and marriage. We'd known each other since freshman year of college, had been through everything together, breakups and graduations and first jobs and all the milestones of our 20s. She was like a sister to me, or so I thought. I should have noticed the signs, the way Marcus would suddenly be available when he knew Marissa was coming over, the way they'd share inside jokes I didn't understand, the way Marissa started dressing differently, wearing more makeup, losing weight, the way Marcus would volunteer to drive her home even though she lived 20 minutes in the opposite direction, the way my phone would sometimes show Marcus's location at her apartment when he'd told me he was at the gym or the office, but I was so deep in my own world, so focused on my career, so trusting of the two people I loved most, that I explained everything away. I made excuses. I told myself I was being paranoid and insecure. The truth came out on a Tuesday evening in October. I'd left work early, something I rarely did, because I'd gotten a call that I'd won the bid on a major project. A sustainable housing development that would be the biggest thing I'd ever designed. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I wanted to surprise Marcus, to celebrate together, to share this huge moment with my husband. I stopped at his favorite restaurant and picked up takeout, expensive steaks, and a bottle of champagne. I practically ran to my car, imagining his face when I told him the news. When I got home, Marcus's car was in the driveway. Perfect. He was home early too. I let myself in quietly, wanting to surprise him. The house was dim, and I could hear music playing upstairs in our bedroom. Jazz, the kind Marcus liked. I climbed the stairs with the food and champagne, a smile on my face, ready to celebrate. I pushed open the bedroom door and my entire world shattered into a million pieces. Marcus was in our bed. The bed I'd picked out, with the sheets I'd chosen, in the room I'd designed and painted, and he wasn't alone. Marissa was there with him, my husband and my best friend, tangled together, in my bed, in my house, destroying my life while I'd been out celebrating the biggest professional achievement of my career. They didn't hear me at first. They were too wrapped up in each other. I stood there frozen, the bag of food slipping from my hands and hitting the floor with a thud. That's when they looked up. I'll never forget the expressions on their faces. Marissa's eyes went wide with shock. Then something else, something almost like triumph. Marcus went pale, then red, scrambling for the sheets. And me. I felt like I was watching it happen to someone else, like I was floating above my body, looking down at this awful scene. The woman standing in the doorway wasn't me. She couldn't be, because I was smart and successful and had good judgment. I would never marry a man who would do this. I would never trust a friend capable of this betrayal. But it was me. And they had done this, and as I stood there watching them try to cover themselves, try to explain, I realized with horrible clarity that this wasn't the first time. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This had been going on for a while, maybe years. The late nights, the business trips, Marissa's constant presence in our lives, it all made sense now. They'd been having an affair right under my nose, and I'd been too trusting, too busy, too stupid to see it. Marcus started talking fast, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that they could explain, that I was overreacting. That word made something inside me snap. I walked over to the bed, picked up the champagne bottle I'd dropped, and very calmly said, "Get out of my house, both of you." Now, my voice didn't sound like mine. It was cold and hard and final. Marissa grabbed her clothes and ran past me without a word. Not even an apology, just ran like the coward she was. Marcus tried to talk to me, tried to touch my arm, and I jerked away like he was on fire. "Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. Get your things and get out." He left that night, just packed a bag and left. And I sat on the floor of my bedroom, still in my work clothes, surrounded by expensive takeout and champagne, and tried to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I'd woken up that morning with a husband and a best friend and a career on the rise. Now it was 10 p.m. and I had none of those things. Not really. Because even though I'd gotten the project, even though professionally I was succeeding, personally I felt like I'd been gutted. The next few months were a blur of lawyers and paperwork and avoiding phone calls. Marcus wanted to reconcile. He sent flowers, sent letters, showed up at my office trying to explain. He said it had been a mistake, that he loved me, that Marissa had pursued him and he'd been weak. He blamed her, blamed stress, blamed everything except himself. I didn't respond. I hired the best divorce lawyer in Chicago and filed papers. I didn't want explanations or apologies. I wanted him gone from my life as quickly as possible. Marissa tried to reach out to. She sent me a long email explaining that she hadn't meant for it to happen, that she'd fallen in love with Marcus and couldn't help herself, that she hoped someday I could forgive her. The entitlement of that email, the audacity of asking for forgiveness while simultaneously admitting she'd deliberately betrayed me, it made me furious. I blocked her number, her email, her social media. I deleted every photo of us together, threw away every gift she'd ever given me, erased her from my life as completely as I could. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. Illinois is not a quick divorce state, and Marcus fought me on everything. He wanted the brownstone, wanted half of everything, even though I'd put down the down payment from my inheritance when my grandmother died. He wanted alimony, claimed he deserved it because he'd supported my career. The audacity was breathtaking. My lawyer was a shark, though, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd been through her own messy divorce and had zero patience for cheating husbands. She found evidence of Marcus's affair, documented the timeline, proved he'd been using our joint credit cards to pay for hotels and gifts for Marissa. She destroyed him in court. The final settlement was heavily in my favor. I got the brownstone, most of our savings, and Marcus had to buy me out of some joint investments we'd made. He was furious, tried to appeal, but Patricia had done her job too well. The evidence was ironclad. By the time it was all over, I was officially divorced, financially comfortable, and completely alone. I threw myself into work, spending 12 and 14-hour days at the office, designing buildings, and avoiding my empty house. My colleagues worried about me. My boss, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, kept trying to get me to take time off, to see a therapist, to take care of myself. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine. About 2 months after the divorce was final, I ran into an old colleague at a coffee shop. Thomas Bradford, a structural engineer I'd worked with on several projects. We'd always gotten along well, had good professional chemistry. He asked how I was doing, and I gave him the standard, "Fine, keeping busy," response. He looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Claire, I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry, but I also heard something else. Something I think you should know." My stomach clenched. I didn't want to know anything else. Didn't want more bad news or more betrayal. But Thomas was a good guy, honest and straightforward. If he thought I needed to know something, I probably did. He told me to sit down. We got our coffees and found a corner table away from other people. And then Thomas told me something that changed everything again. He said he'd been at a bar the week before and had overheard Marcus talking to some colleagues. Marcus had been drunk, bragging, really, about how he'd gotten away with the affair for 3 years. How I'd been so focused on work, I never suspected anything. He'd laughed about it, said I'd been the perfect wife in some ways because I was too busy to pay attention to what he was doing. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Marcus said about Marissa. He'd told his colleagues that Marissa had been fun, but now she was getting clingy, talking about marriage and commitment. He'd laughed and said he wasn't going to marry her, that she'd been a convenient affair partner, but he wasn't stupid enough to wife up someone who'd betrayed her best friend. He said he was already seeing someone else, someone new who didn't come with all of Marissa's baggage and desperation. Thomas said Marcus's colleagues had looked uncomfortable, that one of them had tried to change the subject, but Marcus had been on a roll, drunk and cruel and showing exactly who he really was. I sat there absorbing this information. Part of me felt vindicated. Marcus had never loved either of us, had just been using both of us for his own entertainment. But part of me felt sick because Marissa, despite what she'd done, was about to get hurt the same way I had. And much as I hated her, much as I wanted her to suffer for what she'd done to me, hearing that Marcus was planning to humiliate her the way he'd humiliated me stirred something in me. Not forgiveness, not even sympathy, exactly, but a kind of grim recognition that we'd both been played by the same manipulative man. Thomas asked if I was okay. I nodded, thanked him for telling me, and went home. For the first time in months, I felt something other than numbness. I felt angry, really angry. Not at Marissa, but at Marcus. At the way he thought he could just move through life using people and discarding them. At the way he'd taken my trust, my love, my years, and treated them like they were worthless. I'd let him walk away relatively unscathed from the divorce. Sure, I'd gotten the better financial settlement, but he'd gotten away with his reputation mostly intact. His colleagues and clients didn't know the full extent of what he'd done, and now he was planning to do it again, to string Marissa along and then dump her publicly. I didn't know what to do with this information. I sat with it for weeks, watching from a distance as Marissa's social media showed her and Marcus getting back together, posting photos of dates and romantic dinners. She was so happy in those photos, so sure she'd won. She'd posted some passive-aggressive things during our divorce. Things about finding real love and how sometimes you have to follow your heart even when it's complicated. I'd blocked her so I hadn't seen them directly, but mutual friends had told me about it. Now, she was posting engagement photos. Marcus had proposed on a beach, recreating the same proposal he'd done with me years earlier. Same location and everything. The lack of originality would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. And then the wedding invitation arrived. It was sent to my office, addressed formally to Claire Donovan, as if we were distant acquaintances and not former best friends. The wedding was set for 6 months out at the same venue where Marcus and I had gotten married. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. They were going to get married in the same place I'd married him. Probably because Marissa had always been jealous of our wedding. Had probably been planning this since the day she'd stood next to me as my maid of honor. I stared at that invitation for a long time, feeling a cold fury settle over me. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let Marcus humiliate another woman, even if that woman was Marissa. I wasn't going to let him get away with this pattern of behavior. And I wasn't going to stay silent while he rewrote history and played the victim. I needed a plan, though. I needed evidence, ammunition, something that would expose Marcus for what he really was, in a way he couldn't deny or spin. I started digging. I reached back out to Thomas and asked if he'd be willing to give a statement about what he'd overheard at the bar. He said yes immediately. Then I contacted Patricia, my divorce lawyer, and asked her to pull together all the documentation from our divorce. Everything showing Marcus's affair, his lying, his financial manipulation. She put together a comprehensive file, but I needed more than that. I needed something current, something that would prove Marcus was still the same person, still playing games, still manipulating people, so I hired a private investigator. Her name was Diana Reeves, a former police detective who now ran her own firm specializing in infidelity cases. I met with her and explained the situation. I wanted to know if Marcus was actually planning to go through with this marriage or if he was still seeing other people. Diana said she'd take the case but warned me that I might not like what she found. I told her I needed to know the truth. Whatever it was, Diana worked fast. Within 2 weeks, she had photos and video of Marcus with another woman. Not Marissa, someone else entirely. A young associate at his financial consulting firm. They were meeting at hotels, going to dinners in suburbs where they thought nobody would recognize them, being just careless enough that a good investigator could document everything. Diana presented me with a thick folder of evidence showing that Marcus was cheating on his fiancée just like he'd cheated on me. Just like he'd probably been cheating on multiple women throughout our entire marriage. But I still needed more. I needed someone who could deliver this information at the wedding in a way that would have maximum impact. Someone Marcus couldn't dismiss or ignore. Someone with enough credibility and authority that everyone would listen. I thought about this for days, trying to figure out the perfect person. And then it hit me. Marcus's mother. Margaret Donovan had never liked me. I'll admit that. She'd thought her son could do better, that I was too focused on my career, that I wasn't domestic enough. We'd had a polite but cold relationship for the entire 8 years of my marriage. But Margaret had certain values, old-fashioned values about honor and family and doing the right thing. And more importantly, she'd been absolutely horrified when she'd found out about the affair and the divorce. She'd actually called me to apologize for her son's behavior. Said she'd raised him better than that, and she was ashamed. We'd had a surprisingly warm conversation where she'd expressed genuine remorse for how she'd treated me and how Marcus had destroyed our marriage. I hadn't spoken to Margaret since that phone call, but I still had her number. I called her and asked if we could meet for lunch. She agreed immediately, sounding surprised but pleased. We met at a quiet restaurant in Evanston, away from anywhere we might run into people we knew. Margaret looked older than I remembered, more tired. The kind of tired that comes from being disappointed by someone you love. We made small talk for a while, catching up on safe topics. Then I took a breath and told her why I'd really called. I told her about what Thomas had overheard, about the private investigator's findings, about Marcus's pattern of behavior. I showed her the folder Diana had compiled, photo after photo of her son betraying yet another woman. Margaret's hands shook as she looked through the evidence. When she finished, she was quiet for a long time. "He's my son," she finally said, her voice rough with emotion. "I love him. But this is unacceptable. This is not how I raised him." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "What do you need from me, Claire?" That's when I explained my plan. The wedding was in 3 months. I wanted Margaret to attend, to sit in the church. And when the officiant asked if anyone objected, to stand up and tell the truth, to tell everyone what Marcus really was, what he was still doing even as he stood at the altar with Marissa. It was a huge ask. I knew that. I was asking a mother to publicly humiliate her own son. But Margaret sat there for a long moment, looking out the window at the gray Chicago day, and then she nodded. "He needs to be stopped," she said simply. "He can't keep doing this to people." And if the only way to stop him is to shame him publicly, then that's what needs to happen. She reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how I treated you when you were married to Marcus. I'm sorry for not seeing what kind of man he really is. And I'm sorry you had to be the one to show me. I squeezed her hand, feeling a strange kinship with this woman who had been my difficult mother-in-law. We were both victims of Marcus in different ways. Both women who had loved him and been disappointed by who he really was. Over the next 3 months, Margaret and I met regularly. We became unlikely allies, united by our shared goal of exposing Marcus before he could hurt anyone else. Diana continued her surveillance, documenting Marcus's ongoing affair with the associate from his firm. I gathered statements from people who had worked with Marcus, who had seen his manipulation and dishonesty firsthand. Patricia helped me organize everything into a coherent narrative. We built a case, not for court, but for the court of public opinion. The wedding day arrived. It was a sunny Saturday in June, perfect weather for a ceremony. I'd been watching from a distance as Marissa posted her wedding preparations on social media. Photos of dress fittings and flower arrangements and bachelorette parties. She looked genuinely happy in all of them, genuinely excited to be marrying Marcus. Part of me felt guilty about what was about to happen. But then I'd remember how she'd looked at me that day in my bedroom, that flash of triumph in her eyes, and the guilt would fade. She'd made her choices. She'd betrayed me knowingly and deliberately. And Marcus had manipulated both of us. I got dressed carefully that morning. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy or I wasn't there to make a scene myself. I was there to watch justice unfold. I did my hair and makeup, making myself look polished and professional, the successful architect who had moved on with her life. Because I had moved on in many ways. The woman getting ready in the mirror wasn't the broken person who'd sat on her bedroom floor a year and a half ago. She was stronger, harder maybe, but also more sure of herself and what she deserved. Margaret and I had agreed to arrive separately and sit in different parts of the church. We didn't want anyone connecting us. Didn't want to tip off Marcus that something was wrong. I got to the church early and slipped in through a side door, finding a seat in the very back where I could see everything but wouldn't be easily noticed. The church was beautiful, decorated with white roses and pale pink peonies, soft and romantic. The same decorator who had done my wedding to Marcus. I realized with a bitter laugh. Of course, Marissa would use the same vendors, the same everything. She'd probably been planning this wedding since the day I'd announced my engagement 8 years ago. Guests started arriving, filling the pews with friends and family. I recognized many of them. People I'd known during my marriage, people who had taken sides after the divorce. Some had supported me, quietly reaching out to offer condolences and express their disgust at what Marcus had done. Others had stayed loyal to Marcus, either because they didn't know the full story or because they'd chosen to believe his version of events. I saw his colleagues from the financial firm, his college friends, distant relatives I'd met at holidays. They all looked happy, dressed in their wedding finest, ready to celebrate. Then Margaret arrived. She was wearing a navy suit, elegant and dignified, her white hair perfectly styled. She walked down the aisle with her head high and sat in the third row on the groom's side, right where family would be expected to sit. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me in any way, but I saw her hand tremble slightly as she arranged her purse on her lap. This was hard for her, I knew. This was her son, but she was here, and that was what mattered. The music started. The wedding party filed in, bridesmaids in pale pink dresses, groomsmen in dark gray suits. Marcus stood at the front looking confident and happy, smiling at his friends as they took their places. He looked good, I'd admit that. He always knew how to present himself, how to play the part of the perfect groom. That had been part of his appeal, that polish, that ability to make you feel like you were part of something special. I felt nothing looking at him. No anger, no sadness. Just a cold curiosity about how the next hour would unfold. And then Marissa appeared at the back of the church. The music swelled and everyone stood. She looked beautiful, I had to admit. Her dress was stunning, beaded and fitted. Her dark hair was swept up with a veil trailing behind her, and she was carrying a massive bouquet of white roses. She was smiling so wide it must have hurt, practically glowing with happiness. Her father was walking her down the aisle looking proud and oblivious. They'd never known the real story. Her parents, Marissa had told them that she and Marcus had fallen in love after my divorce, had lied about the timeline, had made it seem like a tragic but unavoidable situation rather than a betrayal. They reached the front and her father handed her off to Marcus. They faced each other, holding hands, looking into each other's eyes like they were the only two people in the room. The officiant, an older man in white robes, welcomed everyone and began the ceremony. He talked about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage, about choosing each other every day. The irony was almost too much. I glanced at Margaret and saw her jaw was clenched, her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. The ceremony proceeded through the usual beats. Readings from friends, a poem about love, communion for those who wanted it. Marcus and Marissa gazed at each other throughout, performing their love for the audience. When it came time for the vows, they'd written their own. Marcus went first, talking about how Marissa had changed his life, how she'd shown him what real love felt like, how he'd never been truly happy until he'd met her. The people who knew the real timeline of their relationship shifted uncomfortably, but most of the guests smiled and wiped their eyes. Then Marissa spoke. She talked about fate and destiny, about how some people are meant to be together even when the path to that togetherness is complicated. She said she'd never believed in soulmates until she'd met Marcus, that she knew from the first moment they really talked that he was the person she was supposed to spend her life with. She was crying as she spoke, genuine tears streaming down her face. And watching her, I realized she actually believed it. She'd rewritten history in her own mind, convinced herself that she and Marcus were some great love story instead of two people who had destroyed other people's lives to be together. The officiant asked for the rings. They were exchanged with more meaningful looks and trembling hands. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The officiant smiled at the assembled guests and said the traditional words. If anyone here has any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. It's usually a formality, a line that passes with silence and maybe a few nervous chuckles. But not today. Margaret Donovan stood up. She moved slowly, deliberately, using the pew in front of her for support. Every eye in the church turned to her. There was a collective gasp, confusion rippling through the crowd. Margaret was Marcus's mother. Why would she be objecting? Marcus's face went pale, then red. He took a step toward her, but the officiant held up a hand, stopping him. "Ma'am," the officiant said gently, "do you have something you wish to say?" Margaret's voice was steady and clear when she spoke. "Yes, I have something to say." She looked directly at Marcus, and the pain in her eyes was visible even from where I sat. "Marcus is my son. I love him. But I cannot sit here and watch him make vows he has no intention of keeping. I cannot watch him lie to another woman the way he lied to his first wife." The church erupted in whispers. Marissa's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus tried to speak, but Margaret cut him off. "No, you'll listen to me now. For once in your life, you will listen." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, the same folder I'd given her with Diana's evidence. "My son is currently having an affair with a woman named Jessica Hartley. She works at his firm. They've been seeing each other for the past 4 months, including last night." Margaret's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. "I have photographs, hotel receipts, text messages. I have evidence that my son is still the same man who cheated on his first wife with you, Marissa. He hasn't changed. He won't change. And if you marry him today, you'll be the next woman sitting in divorce court wondering how you missed the signs." The church was completely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. Marissa had turned to Marcus, her face white, her eyes wide with shock. Marcus, her voice was barely a whisper. "Tell her she's lying, tell everyone she's lying," but Marcus couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air, trapped and desperate. And that silence, that inability to deny it, told everyone in that church everything they needed to know. Margaret wasn't done. She walked down the aisle toward them, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "I raised you to be a good man, Marcus. I taught you about honor and respect and treating people with kindness. But somewhere along the way, you decided those things didn't matter, that you could use people and discard them without consequences. Well, today there are consequences." She reached the front and handed the folder to Marissa, whose hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "Open it," Margaret said, not unkindly. "See what you're really marrying." Marissa opened the folder with trembling fingers. The first photo was on top, a clear image of Marcus and Jessica Hartley kissing outside a hotel. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. Marissa made a sound like she'd been punched, a gasping sob that echoed through the silent church. She flipped through the rest of the photos, each one more damning than the last. Marcus reaching for Jessica's hand across a dinner table. Marcus and Jessica entering his apartment building together late at night. Marcus and Jessica in his car, his hand on her face, their faces close together. When Marissa looked up, her face was no longer white. It was red, splotchy with rage and humiliation. She threw the folder at Marcus, papers scattering across the floor. "You bastard!" she screamed. "You absolute bastard! You were cheating on me while we were planning our wedding." Her voice broke on the last word, shrill and raw. Marcus finally found his voice. "Marissa, wait, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. My mother is lying. She's always hated you. She's trying to break us up." He reached for her, but she slapped his hand away. Explain. Marissa's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Like you explained to Claire. Like you explained that we were just friends while you were sleeping with me behind her back." She looked out at the assembled guests, many of whom were pulling out their phones to record this disaster. "You all came here thinking this was a love story. You came thinking Marcus and I were so in love we couldn't help ourselves. But the truth is, he's a liar and a cheat, and I was stupid enough to believe I was different, that he really loved me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But I was never different. I was just another woman he used." Margaret moved to Marissa's side and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, dear. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But better now than in 5 years when you have children and a mortgage and your whole life tangled up with his." Marissa sobbed, her perfect makeup running down her face in black streams. She yanked off the engagement ring Marcus had given her and threw it at him. It bounced off his chest and rolled across the floor, the diamond catching the light from the church windows. "I hope she was worth it," Marissa said. "I hope Jessica Hartley is worth destroying your life. Because that's what you've done. You've destroyed everything." And then she ran. She gathered up her dress in both hands and ran down the aisle, her veil streaming behind her, her father calling after her in confusion. The church doors slammed open and she disappeared into the bright June afternoon. The bridesmaids looked at each other in shock. Then several of them ran after her, their own heels clicking on the marble. The guests were in chaos now, everyone talking at once. Phones out, recording everything for social media. This was going to be all over the internet within hours. Marcus stood at the altar looking destroyed. His perfect hair was messed up where he'd run his hands through it. His boutonniere was crooked. His face was the color of old newspaper. He looked at his mother with something like hatred. "How could you do this to me?" His voice was small and broken. "I'm your son." Margaret looked at him with infinite sadness. "That's exactly why I did it. Because you're my son and I love you too much to let you keep destroying yourself and everyone around you. Maybe this will be the wake-up call you need. Maybe hitting rock bottom will finally make you look at yourself and change." But Marcus didn't look like a man ready to change. He looked like a man who had been caught and was furious about it. He turned to the groomsmen, his friends who had stood by him through the divorce, through the affair, through all of it. "This is insane. You know I wouldn't do this. You know my mother is crazy, right? Tell them." But his friends were backing away, looking uncomfortable. One of them, his best man David, shook his head slowly. "Man, I warned you. I told you to end things with Jessica before the wedding. I told you this would blow up, so they'd known." Marcus's friends had known he was cheating and they'd said nothing. Had let him walk down this aisle ready to make vows he was already breaking. Marcus looked around wildly, searching for someone, anyone to support him. His eyes landed on me in the back of the church. I'd been so still, so quiet, that many people hadn't noticed I was there. But now Marcus saw me and his face went through a series of emotions: surprise, rage, and finally understanding. "You?" he breathed. "This was you. You set this up." He started walking toward me, his hands clenched into fists. Several of his groomsmen moved to stop him, but he shook them off. "You couldn't let me be happy, could you? You had to destroy this because you're bitter and alone and you can't stand to see me with someone else." I stood up as he approached. I was calm, calmer than I'd ever been in my life. "I didn't destroy anything, Marcus. You did that all by yourself. I just made sure everyone could see what you really are before you trapped another woman in a marriage built on lies." My voice carried through the church, clear and steady. "And for the record, I'm not bitter or alone. I'm free. Free from you, free from your manipulation, free from wondering if I was crazy for feeling like something was wrong. Turns out I wasn't crazy. You were just really good at lying." Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You ruined my life. You and my mother. You both ruined everything." The groomsmen finally caught up and grabbed his arms, pulling him back. One of them, a guy named Ryan, I vaguely remembered, said quietly, "Marcus, man, stop. You're making it worse. Just stop." But Marcus couldn't stop. He was unraveling, the mask finally falling away completely to reveal the ugly truth underneath. "I loved you, Claire. I gave you everything and you were never satisfied. Always working, always busy, never making time for me. What was I supposed to do?" I laughed, a sound without humor. "You were supposed to be an adult and communicate. You were supposed to get counseling or ask for a divorce if you weren't happy. You were not supposed to sleep with my best friend in our bed for 3 years while I worked to support our lifestyle, but you did. And now you're doing the same thing to Marissa. That's not love, Marcus. That's a pattern. And patterns don't change unless you want them to, which clearly you don't." Margaret moved to stand beside me, creating a united front. "It's over, Marcus. The wedding is over. Your reputation is over. It's time to face what you've done and figure out what kind of man you want to be going forward." Marcus looked between us, his mother and his ex-wife standing together against him, and something inside him seemed to crumble. His shoulders sagged and he stopped fighting the groomsmen. "Get out," the officiant said firmly, speaking for the first time since Margaret had stood up. "This ceremony is concluded. Everyone, please exit the church." People began filing out, whispering and staring, their phones still recording. This was going to be the scandal of the year in our social circle. I could already imagine the headlines on social media. Groom's mother stops wedding with proof of affair or cheating husband exposed at altar. Marcus would never live this down. His business would suffer once word got out. His friends would distance themselves. He'd become a cautionary tale, the man who destroyed his own wedding. I walked out of the church with Margaret beside me. The June sunshine was almost offensively bright after the darkness inside. Guests were clustered on the lawn, talking in animated groups, reviewing the footage on their phones. I saw Marissa's parents looking confused and devastated, trying to understand what had just happened. Several of her bridesmaids were gathered around someone on a bench near the parking lot. I assumed Marissa herself, though I couldn't see her through the crowd. Margaret and I walked to her car in silence. When we got there, she turned to me with tears running down her face. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was the right thing. Thank you for giving me the courage to do it." I hugged her, this woman who had once been cold to me but who had just publicly destroyed her relationship with her son to stop him from hurting someone else. "Thank you for being willing to do it. You probably saved Marissa years of pain." We stood there for a moment, two women bonded by shared experience with the same terrible man. Then Margaret got in her car and drove away, back to her life that would be forever changed by what she'd done today. I stood in the parking lot, watching the chaos unfold around me. People were leaving now, the wedding guests dispersing to go home or maybe to bars where they could dissect what they'd just witnessed. The caterers were pulling up, probably confused about whether they should still set up for a reception that would never happen. The photographer was packing up his equipment, having captured the most dramatic wedding footage of his career. I saw Thomas Bradford in the crowd and walked over to him. He'd been a guest, invited as one of Marcus's colleagues. But he said with a slight smile, "That was something." I smiled back. "It was necessary." He nodded. "I know. And for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Marcus needed to be stopped before he hurt anyone else." We talked for a few minutes, and Thomas mentioned he'd heard through the grapevine that I was working on a major sustainable housing project. He asked if I needed any structural engineers, said his firm would be interested in bidding on it. We exchanged business cards, and I promised to send him the project details as I was getting ready to leave. I saw Marissa standing alone by a tree away from the crowd. Her bridesmaids had left to deal with the reception venue, and her parents were talking to the official. She looked completely lost, still in her wedding dress, mascara staining her face, her perfect day shattered into pieces. I should have just left. I should have gotten in my car and driven away. But something made me walk over to her. She saw me coming, and her face cycled through several emotions: anger, shame, defiance, and finally, just exhaustion. "I suppose you're happy," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. I shook my head. "No, I'm not happy. I don't take pleasure in watching you get hurt, Marissa. Despite everything you did to me." She laughed bitterly. "But you set this up. You made sure I'd be humiliated in front of everyone I know. I made sure you knew the truth before you married him. I corrected. What Marcus did today, what he's been doing with Jessica Hartley, that's not my fault. That's his fault. I just didn't want you to go through what I went through, finding out years into a marriage that your husband had never been faithful. Marissa was quiet for a long moment, staring at her ruined shoes. I'm sorry, she finally whispered, for what I did to you, for the affair, for destroying your marriage. I told myself it was okay because we were in love, because it was destiny or fate or whatever. But really, I was just selfish. I wanted Marcus and I didn't care who I hurt to get him. It wasn't enough, that apology. It didn't undo the betrayal or the pain or the nights I'd spent wondering what was wrong with me that my husband and best friend would do this. But it was something. I accept your apology, I said, but we're never going to be friends again. Marissa, that's not possible. What I will say is this. Learn from this. Become a better person. Don't do to someone else what you did to me. She nodded, tears starting fresh. I don't know what to do now. Everything was supposed to be perfect. I was supposed to be married and happy and starting my life with Marcus. Your life doesn't require Marcus to start, I said. Trust me on that. You're going to be okay. It doesn't feel like it right now, but you will be. You'll heal and move on, and eventually you'll look back on this and be grateful you found out who he really was before you married him. Marissa looked at me with something like wonder. How are you so calm? How are you not screaming at me or rubbing this in my face? I smiled slightly, because I already did my grieving and my angry and my healing. I'm past it now. And because making you feel worse wouldn't make me feel better. It would just make both of us miserable. I left her there under the tree and walked to my car. As I drove away from the church, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of betrayal, of wondering if I'd ever get justice, it was gone. Marcus had been exposed. His pattern of behavior was now public knowledge. And I'd played a part in stopping him from hurting someone else the way he'd hurt me. It wasn't traditional revenge, but it was justice. And sometimes justice is better than revenge, because it doesn't corrode your soul the way revenge does. The fallout from the wedding was extensive. By that evening, videos of Margaret's objection and Marcus's meltdown were all over social media. Someone had live-streamed parts of it, and it had gone viral. Local news picked it up as a human interest story. Marcus's firm asked him to resign within a week, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Jessica Hartley, the woman he'd been cheating with, released a statement saying she'd had no idea Marcus was engaged, that he'd told her he was single, and that she was horrified to learn the truth. I suspected that wasn't entirely accurate based on Diana's surveillance, but I understood her wanting to distance herself from the disaster. Marissa disappeared for a while. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd gone to stay with her sister in California, that she was taking time off work to figure things out. Her social media went dark. All the wedding planning posts deleted, the engagement photos removed. When she finally posted again months later, it was a simple statement about learning from mistakes and growing as a person. She never mentioned Marcus by name, but everyone knew what she meant. As for me, life got better. The sustainable housing project I'd won became a huge success, earning awards and recognition in architectural journals. I made partner at my firm, achieving the goal I'd been working toward for years. I started dating again, carefully and slowly, learning to trust my instincts about people. I went to therapy and worked through the trauma of the betrayal, understanding how it had affected me and how to heal from it. Margaret and I stayed in touch, developing an unlikely friendship. We'd meet for lunch once a month, talking about our lives, our work, everything except Marcus. She'd cut him off financially and emotionally, telling him he needed to figure his life out on his own. It was hard for her, I knew, but she maintained that boundaries were necessary for him to change. Whether he ever did change, I don't know. I made a point of not following his life or caring what happened to him. About a year after the wedding disaster, I ran into Thomas Bradford again at a professional conference. We'd been working together on the housing project and had developed a good rapport. He asked me to dinner, not as colleagues, but as something more. I said yes. We took it slow, building friendship before romance, making sure we were on the same page about what we wanted. Thomas was nothing like Marcus. Steady and honest and genuinely interested in my work and my life. When he met Margaret, they got along immediately. And she told me later she approved, which made me laugh because I'd learned not to need anyone's approval for my choices. 2 years after the ruined wedding, I was designing another major project. This time, a green space in the heart of downtown Chicago that would provide public gardens and walking paths. I was at the site one afternoon, reviewing plans with the construction team, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Claire Donovan," I said, my standard professional greeting. "Claire, it's Marissa." I hadn't heard her voice in 2 years, and hearing it now sent a jolt through me. "Hi," I said cautiously. "How are you?" "I'm okay," she said. "Actually, I'm good. I'm calling because I wanted to thank you." That surprised me. "Thank me for what?" She took a breath. "For stopping that wedding. For making sure I saw who Marcus really was before I married him." It didn't feel like a favor at the time. It felt like the worst day of my life. But looking back now, you saved me from making the biggest mistake I could have made. So thank you. We talked for a few more minutes, carefully and politely, to people who shared a painful history but had moved past it. She told me she'd gotten therapy, worked on herself, was seeing someone new who treated her well. She'd changed careers, was working in nonprofit management now, finding it more fulfilling than the corporate marketing she'd done before. She sounded different, more grounded, more genuine than the Marissa I'd known. When we hung up, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. That evening, I told Thomas about the call over dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant. He listened quietly and then asked, "How did it feel hearing from her?" I thought about it. "Peaceful," I said finally. It felt peaceful, like the last chapter of that story finally closed. He reached across the table and took my hand. "You're an amazing person, Claire. The fact that you can find peace instead of bitterness after everything you went through, that's remarkable." But I didn't feel remarkable. I just felt like someone who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side stronger. The wedding disaster had been dramatic and public and satisfying in its own way. Watching Marcus's facade crumble, seeing him exposed for what he really was, it had given me a sense of justice. But the real victory, the real revenge, if you could call it that, was building a better life. It was finding happiness and success and peace without him. It was proving that his betrayal hadn't broken me, had actually made me stronger. 3 years after the wedding, Margaret called me with news. Marcus had moved to another city, was working at a much smaller firm, and had apparently gotten engaged again. "Should we warn her?" Margaret asked, her voice troubled. I thought about it for a long moment. "That's up to you," I said finally. "You're his mother. But for me, I'm done. I did what I could to stop him from hurting Marissa. I can't spend my life following Marcus around warning every woman he dates. At some point, people have to learn their own lessons." Margaret sighed. "You're right. I just hate seeing him repeat the same patterns." "Maybe he's changed," I offered, though I didn't believe it. "Maybe this time will be different." But I knew it probably wouldn't be. People like Marcus don't change unless they want to, unless they do the hard work of examining themselves and their behavior. And from what Margaret told me, Marcus hadn't done any of that. He'd moved cities, changed jobs, and found a new woman to manipulate. The pattern continued, but that wasn't my problem anymore. My problem was deciding which flowers to plant in the public garden project, and whether Thomas and I should get a dog, and how to mentor the young architects at my firm who reminded me of myself 10 years ago. My life was full and rich and good, and Marcus was just a bad memory, a cautionary tale I told sometimes at dinner parties when the conversation turned to relationships and red flags. Looking back now, standing in that church watching Marcus marry Marissa had been a kind of closure in itself, seeing them at the altar. So sure they'd won, so convinced they were getting their happy ending, and knowing what was about to happen. It had given me a sense of power I'd lost during the divorce. And when Margaret stood up and spoke the truth, when the carefully constructed lie of their relationship fell apart in front of everyone, it had been justice, not revenge, because I hadn't wanted to hurt them for the sake of hurting them, but justice, making sure the truth was known, making sure Marcus couldn't keep using his charm and lies to trap women in toxic relationships. Was it harsh? Maybe. Could I have handled it differently? Probably. But I don't regret it. I don't regret giving Margaret the information she needed to make her own choice. I don't regret hiring Diana to document Marcus's ongoing infidelity. I don't regret any of it because the alternative was letting Marcus marry Marissa while cheating on her, letting him repeat the exact pattern he'd done to me, letting another woman waste years of her life on a man who would never be faithful. And now, years later, I can say with certainty that stopping that wedding was one of the best things I've ever done. Not because it hurt Marcus, though I won't pretend I didn't take some satisfaction in watching his perfect day implode. But because it freed Marissa, it gave her the chance to rebuild her life before it She was legally and financially tied to someone who would have made her miserable, and it gave me peace. The peace of knowing I'd used my painful experience to help someone else, even someone who had betrayed me. So that's my story. The story of how my ex-husband tried to marry my ex-best friend, and how his own mother stopped the wedding with the truth about who he really was. It's messy and complicated, and not everyone will agree with how I handled it. Some people have said I should have stayed out of it, let Marissa learn her own lessons. Others have said I didn't go far enough, that I should have exposed Marcus earlier or more publicly. But I did what felt right to me at the time, and I stand by those choices. If you're watching this and you're thinking about getting revenge on someone who hurt you, my advice is this: make sure it's about justice, not just causing pain. Make sure you're doing it to protect yourself or someone else, not just to make yourself feel better. Because revenge for its own sake will eat you alive. It will consume you and turn you into someone bitter and small. But justice, standing up for what's right, exposing the truth so people can make informed decisions, that's different. That's using your pain to prevent someone else's pain. And that's something you can live with. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for being part of this community where we share experiences and support each other. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Did I do the right thing stopping that wedding? Should I have stayed out of it? Or was Marcus's mother the real hero of this story? I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your own experiences with betrayal and justice and moving on. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you in any way or made you think differently about a situation in your own life, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories. Your support means everything, and it helps me keep bringing you these real stories of survival, strength, and finding peace after betrayal. I'm looking forward to reading your comments and connecting with you. On the screen, you can see 2 more powerful stories I think you'll love. There's so much more content on this channel, so many stories of people who found their way through darkness into light. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, remember this: you are stronger than the worst thing that's happened to you. You deserve honesty and respect in your relationships. Your pain is valid, but it doesn't have to define you. And sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, building a beautiful life, and refusing to let someone else's betrayal make you bitter. Take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and know that no matter what you've been through, there is always a path forward. With love and respect. I'll see you in the next one.